There is a particular kind of loneliness that exists even in complete privacy, alone in a room with no one watching, no one listening. And still, some part of you continues performing, continues editing, continues keeping certain truths just out of reach, even from yourself. You have grown so skilled at this that you may not always notice you are doing it. But something in you knows. Something always knows. Why do certain truths remain hidden even when there is no audience left to hide them from? Why does privacy alone not guarantee honesty, even with the one person who will never repeat what you say? Before we explore this together, subscribe to this channel where we uncover the hidden psychology behind everyday life. Picture a house with a locked room deep inside it, one you built so long ago that you have nearly forgotten you hold the key. You do not avoid this room out of malice. You avoid it because looking inside would require admitting something uncomfortable, not to the world, but to yourself. What might it mean, you may wonder, if the most difficult person to be honest with was never anyone else at all, but the version of you standing quietly on the other side of that door? Carl Jung believed that the persona, so carefully constructed for the outside world, often extends its reach inward as well, until a person becomes skilled at deceiving not only others, but themselves. He called the disowned, unexamined material the shadow, and he warned that what remains hidden there does not disappear. It simply operates quietly, shaping your choices from behind a door you have stopped trying to open. What if the truths you hide even from yourself are not shameful secrets at all, but simply unfinished parts of a self still waiting to be acknowledged? Here are 7 such truths, common enough that most people carry some version of each, hidden carefully enough that even naming them may feel, at first, unfamiliar. The first is the ambition you have quietly abandoned, disguised now as contentment. You tell yourself you no longer want what you once wanted, that you have simply grown past it, matured beyond it. But is that peace genuine? Or is it a story constructed to avoid grieving a dream you were too afraid to keep pursuing? The second is the resentment you carry towards someone you love, buried beneath years of loyalty and good intentions. You would never say it aloud, perhaps not even to yourself in a fully formed sentence. But it exists, quietly, shaping the tone of certain conversations, the length of certain silences. Why does love so often require us to disown the parts of it that feel less than loving? The third is the fear that you are, in some fundamental way, not enough capable, intelligent, and accomplished on the surface, while underneath a much older uncertainty continues to whisper that none of it will ever be sufficient. Jung might have said this fear belongs to the shadow precisely because it contradicts the persona so completely, and so it is pushed downward, hidden even from the person carrying it. The fourth is the loneliness that exists inside relationships that appear, from the outside, perfectly full, surrounded by people, genuinely cared for, and still, in certain quiet moments, entirely unseen. Is that loneliness a flaw in the relationships themselves? Or is it evidence of a part of you that has never been shown to anyone, including, perhaps, yourself? The fifth is the anger you have never fully allowed yourself to feel toward a parent, a sibling, or an earlier version of your own life, anger softened immediately by guilt, by gratitude, by the belief that you have no right to feel it at all. Alfred Adler believed that unexpressed anger toward early relationships often reshapes itself into anxiety or self-criticism, precisely because it was never permitted its original, honest form. The sixth is the exhaustion behind your own competence, the quiet truth that being reliable, capable, and endlessly composed has cost you more than anyone around you has ever noticed. You maintain this image so consistently that even you have started to believe you do not need rest, comfort, or help, though some part of you clearly does. The seventh is the simple, uncomfortable truth that you do not yet fully know who you are outside of everything you have been asked to become, outside the roles, the expectations, the identities assembled gradually over years without much conscious choice involved. Is that uncertainty a failure? Or is it, more honestly, the beginning of a question most people spend their whole lives avoiding? But here is the deeper question worth sitting with longer than any single item on this list. Why do we hide these truths from ourselves specifically, when no one else is even in the room to judge us for them? Jung believed that self-deception often serves a protective function, however costly it eventually becomes. Facing these truths fully would require reorganizing an entire sense of identity, and the psyche, quite reasonably, resists that kind of disruption unless it feels prepared to survive it. Is this resistance a weakness? Or is it simply evidence that some part of you has been trying, however imperfectly, to protect the rest of you from being overwhelmed too quickly? Picture the tree standing bare through winter, appearing from a distance like something finished, without depth. Beneath the surface, unseen, the roots continue their patient widening in the dark. Is the discomfort of recognizing these hidden truths a sign that something in you is breaking? Or is it simply the visible cost of something long buried finally being given room to grow toward the surface? This is the turn worth making gently here. Naming these truths, even quietly, even only to yourself, is not a confession of failure. It may be the earliest sign of something Jung called individuation, the long, uneven process of becoming a whole person by finally integrating what was once too uncomfortable to examine directly. Individuation, at this stage, rarely feels graceful right away. It tends to feel initially like exposure to something you had hoped to avoid indefinitely. Only later does it begin to feel like relief. So, how do you actually begin facing truths this deeply hidden, even from yourself? This is where the observer becomes essential, the quiet witness inside you capable of noticing a hidden truth surfacing, briefly, before it is pushed back down out of habit. Not the part of you that immediately reaches for an easier explanation. The part that can simply notice, calmly, something true just surfaced, and I do not have to hide it again the moment it becomes uncomfortable. Marcus Aurelius often reminded himself that self-examination, however uncomfortable, is far less costly than a lifetime spent avoiding it. Can you sit, briefly, with one of these 7 truths, without immediately explaining it away or minimizing its significance? Can you allow it simply to exist, acknowledged, even before you know exactly what to do about it? And here is something worth noticing. If you look honestly, these particular truths have likely surfaced before, in quieter moments, late at night, in the space just before sleep, only to be pushed back down again by morning. Why does life seem to offer these same glimpses repeatedly, in different disguises, until they are finally acknowledged rather than returned once more to the dark? Jung believed that whatever remains unconscious in us tends to reappear in our lives as pattern, as recurring discomfort, until it is finally recognized and consciously integrated. Perhaps these 7 truths are not really separate from one another at all. Perhaps they are simply different faces of the same older question. How much of yourself have you learned to hide, even from your own awareness, in order to remain comfortable, acceptable, and understandable to yourself? Viktor Frankl believed that between what happens to a person and how they respond, a space exists narrow, but entirely their own. You cannot control which truths first became too uncomfortable to face directly. But the space between a hidden truth surfacing and your choice to finally acknowledge it, that space belongs entirely to you. So what does acknowledging these truths actually look like in practice? Not something dramatic. Not a single sweeping confession that changes everything overnight. It might look like admitting, quietly, that a long-abandoned ambition still matters to you, without needing to act on it immediately. It might look like allowing yourself to feel resentment toward someone you love, without believing that feeling cancels out the love itself. It might look like sitting with a fear of inadequacy long enough to examine where it actually came from, rather than immediately silencing it with achievement. It might look like simply writing down, privately, one truth you have never said aloud, and letting it exist on the page without needing to resolve it right away. None of this arrives with fanfare. Jung once suggested that people will do almost anything, no matter how elaborate, to avoid facing the contents of their own soul. And if that is true, then simply naming even one of these 7 truths honestly, in the quiet of your own awareness, may already be a significant act of courage. Return, for a moment, to that locked room deep inside the house, the one you built so long ago you nearly forgot you held the key. Imagine standing at the door now, not to empty the room all at once, not to force every truth into the light in a single afternoon, but simply to acknowledge, quietly, that the room exists, and that its contents were never as unbearable as the years of avoidance made them seem. Does that make the room less private? No. But does it mean you are finally living in the whole house rather than just the rooms you were comfortable showing yourself? Perhaps, finally. Yes. And so we return to the question beneath all 7 truths, beneath every quietly abandoned ambition, every unexamined resentment, every fear kept hidden even from your own reflection. What actually remains of you once you no longer need to hide these particular truths from yourself? What remains when honesty no longer requires an audience to finally become real? Jung offered an answer that has outlasted him by nearly a century. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Perhaps the truths you have hidden from everyone, even yourself, were never meant to stay buried forever. Perhaps they were simply waiting, patiently, for a quiet enough moment and a brave enough version of you to finally let them be known. If this resonated, subscribe to this channel and join us as we keep uncovering these hidden truths. Which of these 7 resonated with you the most? And what is one truth you're only now beginning to admit to yourself? Write it in the comments below, and let that locked room, wherever it exists in you, finally be seen for what it truly holds.